As you know, there are certain Islamic countries that have committed to be partners with us in the war on terrorism. Jordan is one of them. But listen to a quote recently, not too long ago, given by King Abdullah II. This is what he said. Quote, "Insulting Muhammad is a crime that cannot be justified under the pretext of freedom of expression." Close quote. In other words, he is not committed to what we are committed to. He's saying it's a crime. It's a criminal act to insult Muhammad. Now, where does this idea, I beg your pardon, begin? It begins with Muhammad himself. Now, for those of you who missed yesterday's program, I spent a lot of time talking about what's going on in Paris, and I invite you to go to our website, Voice of Resistance, to watch that episode. I'm going to pick up where I left off, give you a little bit of background. Muhammad used to live in Mecca as a younger man, and then he fled Mecca for Medina. When he was in Mecca, he was preaching and writing psalms and poetry, part of which are in the Quran now, about the unity of God, that God is one, and that polytheism, many gods, was a sin. Now, Mecca was a very critical center point in the region for polytheism, and there were many gods that were worshipped there. And so he really got under the skin of the leaders of Mecca, and he had maybe 180, 200 followers after years of preaching. So it was not a huge threat to them, but it was an annoyance. And they decided that they were going to assassinate him. He got word of it, and he fled. And it is what is called the Hijrah. It is the beginning of the Muslim calendar. So Muhammad and his followers went to Medina, and then when he was in Medina, that is when, allegedly, Allah showed him that he could use force. He could use lethal force in the promotion of Islam and the conversion of his enemies, or just the flat-out killing of his enemies. Well, he had great success in various campaigns. You can read about it in the book that I've told you to read, The Life of Muhammad. But there's a point that is really critical to what we're doing. When he was finally strong enough with his followers to march on Mecca itself, right? People in Mecca were terrified. They thought, oh my goodness, we kicked him out. He's coming here to wreak havoc. He's coming here for revenge. But Muhammad marched in peacefully with an army of 10,000 people, and he circumvented or walked around the Kaaba, the prescribed number of times. I believe it was 7 times. And on his way in, he urged his followers, let's take the city peacefully. But there were 6 people that he said must die. We find them, we kill them. 3 of them, half of those that were sentenced to death by Muhammad, were people who had mocked him in song and in poetry. I want to read you this passage from Ibn Kathir. Ibn Kathir is one of the most respected histories of Muhammad's life. It is studied by most devout Muslims throughout the world and in America. I've got my own 4-volume set. So the man's name was Abd Allah, who was making songs and poems against Muhammad. Here's what it says. He had 2 female singers, Fartana and a friend, who would sing songs mocking the messenger of God, that's Muhammad, and the Muslims. This is why the messenger of God condemned him and the 2 singers to death. Who condemned these people to death? Muhammad himself. Why were they condemned to death? Because they sang songs mocking Muhammad, insulting them. He, the enemy of Muhammad, Abd Allah, he was killed while he clutched the hangings of the Kaaba. One of his woman singers was killed while the other one was granted clemency. She fled and was begging for her life, and sometime later Muhammad found out that she was still alive and was asking to be forgiven, and he forgave her. He was clutching the hangings of the Kaaba. He was at the very center of the worship of God or gods that were in Mecca. All right, it would be like somebody going to the altar of a church, or in the Jewish realm where they clung onto the horns of the altar. In other words, it was a sacred place where someone could beg for mercy. And even then, Muhammad would not give that man mercy. He had him murdered, killed, executed. All right? So, again, why? Because he mocked Muhammad. Who ordered it? Muhammad. And as I have discussed in other shows, showing from the history of Islam at that time, there were many people that Muhammad condemned to death for this exact thing. And so when the perpetrators of the slaughter at the magazine Charlie Hebdo went in, they said that they were avenging Muhammad. And they were following the example of Muhammad. And they were following Sharia law. In other words, what they were doing is inherent to Islam itself and is rooted in the so-called prophet Muhammad. I'll close with one other thought before we go. Please let's stop calling him the prophet Muhammad. He was not a prophet. He was a false prophet, if anything. All right? He was not a prophet. And we should not give even the honor of that title to somebody whose mission was to crush Christianity, to deny, legally deny, by force deny the public worship of the true God and the public proclamation of the true good news, the gospel of Jesus Christ. We should not honor that man as somebody who we would call the prophet. We should look at him like we look at someone like Karl Marx or Vladimir Lenin or Joseph Stalin, who was committed to extinguishing Christianity. That's what we're dealing with. And the people who want to understand, why are they killing people for a cartoon, for insulting, for little political free speech? Because that's what Muhammad did. Evidently, Muhammad had really thin skin. And evidently, so do his most devout followers.
You have two choices. I mean, you can try to raise your children by design, or you will raise them by default. There are no perfect parents. We're going to get it wrong sometimes. If we have a plan, we've got a better chance of getting it right in the long run.
There is something deep within the heart of every human being that longs for parental acceptance and approval. When does a boy become a man?
Get a group of guys around and ask them that question.
I don't think there's a certain age. Some men stay boys their whole life.
I would say, 16, 18 years old.
Wow, that's a good question.
When they get bar mitzvah.
Well, I think when he has a child. So I just became at 56, 56 years old.
Without the power of the Holy Spirit changing us and giving us power over our sin, we can't hope to be the dads that our kids need us to be.